Good evening, ladies and gentlemen.
Lately I've been reeling, watching the nightly news. Don't seem to find the rhythm, just wanna sing the blues. Gotta get that fire back in my bones. So won't somebody please pass the megaphone? Oh, hear my prayer tonight, I'm singing to the sky. Give me strength to raise my voice, let me testify. Oh, hear my prayer tonight, 'cause this is do or die. The time has come to make a choice. Let it move you, well, you let it move. Oh, let it move you. Let it move you. Oh, let it move. Let it move you. Though I walk through the valley in the shadow of night, oh, with you by my side, I'm stepping into the light. I choose. Go let it move you. Go let it move. Go let it move you. Joy down in my heart to stay. I need that joy down in my heart to stay.
Good evening and welcome to a special edition of The Voice. We have been traveling around the state of North Carolina this week with Barronelle Stutzman and ADF attorney Matt Sharp to talk to people about what it looks like when a state or a locality adopts a SOGI law. As you may know or not know, SOGI means sexual orientation and gender identity. And so we wanted to share with you this special edition of The Voice. I hope you enjoy the program.
I think the worst part is when they say, I won't serve gay people. That's just not true. I've never discriminated against anyone in my life. It was a Friday, March 1st, 2013. One of my favorite customers, Rob Ingersoll, walked into the store. Rob's more than a customer, he's a friend. He's been coming in to me for over 9 years for birthdays, anniversaries, Valentine's Day, Mother's Day. His arrangements were my favorite to design. They were really fun and challenging. We'd bounce different ideas around and he'd let me be creative and produce something that was unique and special for him. Floral design is an art, and Rob gets that. I knew Rob would be coming in. He had been there the week before when I was out and told the staff that he and his longtime partner, Kurt, were getting married. I knew Rob would want me to create floral designs for their wedding. I love Rob, but I knew I couldn't do this. I'm a devout Christian. My relationship with Jesus Christ is the most important thing in my life. That's where everything I am and everything I have comes from, including my creativity. My faith also teaches me that marriage is a sacred union between a man and a woman. When the staff told me about Rob's visit, my husband and I talked and prayed about it. I would gladly sell him prearranged flowers or loose flowers, but I knew that as much as I love Rob, I could not create something to celebrate an event that was totally against my faith. I didn't want to hurt Rob's feelings, and I wanted to tell him as gently as possible. On that Friday, Rob came back. I took his hand in mine and told him I could not do his wedding because of my relationship with Jesus Christ. Rob said he understood and was very loving. We chatted as we always had. He talked about his mom walking him down the aisle, how we got engaged. Then Rob asked me to recommend another florist. And I recommended 3 that I knew would do him a good job. We hugged each other and Rob left. I was so thankful that Rob had graciously accepted my explanation and that we had parted as friends. Until a few weeks later, I got a letter in the mail from Washington State's Attorney General. The government was threatening to sue me unless I designed floral arrangements for same-sex weddings. I was in shock. It didn't seem possible to me that Rob would have filed a complaint, and he hadn't. The Attorney General saw a post Rob's partner had put on social media and decided on his own to threaten me, to take away my livelihood, unless I would create art for an event I didn't believe in. But I could never do that. I can't use the gift God gave me to violate my relationship with him. So the government and the ACLU sued my business and me personally for discrimination. My lawyers and I have been battling this case in court for 4 years. My case is simple. Will I serve gay customers? Yes, I served Rob joyfully for over 9 years and would welcome him back to my shop even now. Will I hire gay employees? Yes, and I have. Will I let the government force me to create art expressing things I don't believe in? No, and that's my right. That's every American's First Amendment right. What does freedom of expression mean if the government tells me how to express my art? What does freedom of religion mean if the government tells me I can't live out my relationship with Jesus Christ? If I lose in court, I will likely lose everything. The penalties and attorney's fees could be well over $1 million. My business would be gone. My husband and I would lose our home and our retirement. But I have faith. God gave me a gift. And I just want to continue serving him by using that gift to bring beauty and joy into people's lives. Rob and Kurt had the freedom to live their lives according to their beliefs. Should I not have that same right too?
So let's just dive right in. So a lot of you are familiar with this story. Let me give a little bit of background, because you're going to be hearing tonight a lot about what we call SOGI laws. It's a little acronym we use for sexual orientation, SO, gender identity, GI laws. What these are the laws that have been used to go after people like Barronelle Stutzman, like Jack Phillips, the baker in Colorado, and many other ADF clients. These are laws that were originally born out of the civil rights movement. During the 1960s, we had instances in our country where people were being denied access to things like hotel rooms or service at a restaurant because of the color of their skin, because of their national origin, because of their religion and other sort of important, immutable characteristics like that. And those were good laws and have had a lot of benefits in society. But unfortunately, in recent years, we've seen states take those and expand them by including gender identity and sexual orientation. And what these have resulted in is that when you have someone like Barronelle or someone like Jack Phillips who declines to, in Jack's case, create a cake celebrating a same-sex wedding, they find themselves being prosecuted under these laws. And so you're going to be hearing a lot about that tonight. And the reason we bring this up, and we're going to be talking more, is this is a threat that you guys are now facing here in North Carolina. And I think there's no more powerful way to be able to explain to people why do we oppose this than to tell stories like those of Barronelle. And we thought there's no better way than for you to meet her in person. So Barronelle, let me start off. How did you get into the floral business to begin with? Tell us a little bit about what led you into this career path.
I was never going to be a florist, never entered my mind, and my mom bought a shop, and she asked me if I would deliver after work. And being the dutiful daughter that I am, I said, sure, Mom. But I'm directionally handicapped. I do not know north, south, east, and west. So I would say, turn right where the three shrubs are in the barking dog. So my career in that was very short-lived. And so then I started washing buckets and cleaning flowers and bathrooms and working around the shop. And I was trained by 5 excellent designers, went back to school and became a full-fledged florist. My mom could sell anything, and she would come up with all these creative ideas, and then she'd come to me and she said, I just sold that, now you figure out how to do it. And that's where my creative side came in. And then one day she sold a singing bouquet, and she said, I want you to deliver this. So, okay, Mom. So I'm in the middle of this Hapo credit union with a bouquet in my hand singing, You Light Up My Life. It was one of the worst times in my floral history.
So could we get an encore of that tonight?
No.
I've tried. I'm so close. One of these times I'm going to get her to do it. So from there, you went from sort of being a delivery singer to helping design to eventually owning Arlene's Flowers, your family flower shop. How did that come about of you taking over the flower shop?
Well, my mom got Alzheimer's, and so my husband and I bought Arlene's from her 25 years ago. And we've been in business for 47 years. We've had all types of employees, all types of customers. We're on our 3rd generation of prom flowers, and it is just a joy to be in the business we are. We're very blessed to work with God's creation.
And I know we've talked about some of the prom flowers and things like that. I mean, this really becomes almost like you get to know the families and their kids and their grandkids as they come into the shop and develop that relationship with them.
Yes.
So speaking of that, we've talked about, sort of the normal floral arrangements we all think of, but there's a particular type and a particular sort of event that you do that has a particular special place for you, and that's weddings. Tell us a little bit about, I'm not in the floral business, and I just think of weddings like you go in and say, give me, a dozen of those, but that's not the case. Walk me through why weddings are so important to you and what it means when you get a request to do a wedding.
We love customers like Matt, by the way. Weddings are so important because they're sacred to me, and they're the relationship between Christ and this church. And many times I'll spend months with the bride and groom. I find out how they met, how they got engaged, what they like, what they fight over, what's their favorite color, what do they want to convey for their wedding. And then we take all this information and we create, hopefully, the perfect bouquet for the bride and the flowers for the ceremony. And then when we service weddings, we, of course, set the flowers up, but many times also a button on a tux. I'll help the bride get dressed. If she asks me for any advice, I'll give it to her. We greet the guest. We calm the parents. It's so involved. And then when I get to watch the bride and groom walk down the aisle and say their vows and know that this is a symbol of Christ and his church, then I know I've done my job. And then we clean up, and many times we'll go back and pick up all the rooms where the bridesmaids have thrown everything. And then when that couple comes back in for their anniversary or for their birthday or for the birth of their child, I mean, it is such a blessing. It just becomes a family.
I've heard you, in the times we've done this, talk about just the different customers you've had over the years, the different relationships you formed with people. And among those, and we heard a little bit on the video, is the friendship that you have, and I do say have, not had, have, with Rob Ingersoll. Tell us a little bit, and we heard some of the video, but the friendship you two had, the creativity you got to explore together over the years.
Rob has been one of my favorite customers for almost 10 years. And I knew Rob was gay from the beginning. It was never an issue. But he has such a creative mind. And the thing that drew me to Rob was he was a manager of a store. And he was so concerned about his employees and personal care. And that really impressed me about him, his soft heart. But he would come in for birthdays or anniversaries or parties. And he would always pick out these unusual containers. And he would tell me what the theme was. And then he'd say, do your thing. And I love to do that because I got to work out of the box, make something different and unique for him. And it was always something that was always flamboyant, and he loved my creations, and I loved doing them for him. If Rob walked into my store today, I would wait on him for another 10 years. He is missed.
Yeah. And what you hear from Barronelle is similar sentiments to what we hear from a lot of the clients that we represent who find themselves the victims of these SOGI laws. People that serve everyone that walk into their shop, that actually develop good relationships and friendships with LGBT customers of theirs. And in all of these, it is never, ever about declining to serve a person. It is always about declining to participate in an event or create a message that conflicts with those deeply held religious beliefs. With Jack Phillips, he was asked to do a cake celebrating same-sex wedding. And for Jack, if you've ever seen what he does, it's not just frosting on cake. It is a piece of art. And like Barronelle, it tells a story. He gets to know the couple. He wants to know what are their dreams, what are the things that they share in common, what things do they want communicated on their cake. And it's this joint effort where it becomes much more than just a pastry. It becomes a work of art that tells a story. And so when someone comes into Jack's shop or Barronelle's shop and says, I want you to help me with this event, to use your talents, to speak a message, but it violates their beliefs, all they're asking for is to not be forced by the government to create expression, to participate in events that violate those deeply held beliefs. So Barronelle, let's walk through the story a little bit more. So long-time friendship with Rob for almost 10 years. 2013, what happened?
When Washington passed the same-sex marriage law, Rob had been in twice before to the store telling the girls he was getting married, and he had asked for me. And so when they told me, I went home and I asked my husband, I said, what are we going to do about this? And he said, you know, the Bible's very clear about marriage, so it's my job to go back and tell Rob the best way I could that I couldn't do his wedding. So when he came in and we were talking, and before he got too far into talking about his wedding, I just put my hands on his and I said, Rob, I'm sorry, I can't do your wedding because of my relationship with Jesus Christ. He said he understood. We talked about his mom walking him down the aisle. We talked about why they decided to get married. We talked about his future plans. We just visited for a while, and then he said, would you recommend another florist? Which I did. I recommended 3 other florists for him, which he got his flowers from one of those florists. And we hugged each other, and Rob left. His partner put something on Facebook that night that simply said, Barronelle has every right to believe the way she does, but she hurt our feelings. And from there, it went viral.
And one of the people that saw that post was the Washington Attorney General. Now, normally when these laws are enforced, there's some commission, some lower level government employee that does an investigation, that they're going to call up the person and, you know, collect evidence and all of this. That's not what happened here. In a unprecedented move, never happened before, never happened since, the Washington Attorney General decided to make Barronelle an example. Went after her, both corporately, her business, and personally. So everything she owns, everything she and her husband have worked for is on the line. And we saw a level of hostility directed towards her and towards her beliefs. And one of the most egregious ways we saw this was just a few years after Barronelle's situation happened. There was a coffee shop in Washington State, and it was owned by a gay individual. And one day there was some young college students that were in the area, and they'd been handing out some pro-life flyers. And they decided to take a break, so they walked into this coffee shop, ordered some coffees, and were just going to sort of go through what had been happening throughout the day. Well, the coffee shop owner found out that they were in there, and he did not like what they were doing. He did not like their pro-life views, their religious views, and confronted them, and in a video that is all over the internet, in very vile, vulgar terms, attacked their Christian faith, attacked their views, and kicked them out of the coffee shop. Refused to serve the person. Did the Attorney General of Washington go after them for a clear religious discrimination, declining to serve someone because of their religion? Not at all. But continued to go after Barronelle. Now, this hostility that he showed you, unfortunately, it wasn't just limited to him and the people of his office. It almost inspired others to come after you as well. Can you talk a little bit about some of the hatred you've experienced over the years?
We have 5 lines in our shop, and we're open from 7 in the morning till 6 at night. And those lines were ringing constantly that whole time, with death threats, computer threats, picketing threats. We had to get a security system. We had to notify the police. Had to change the way I went to work. I learned so many new words that I didn't know they weren't in the dictionary. And I shouldn't have looked them up, but anyway. And even today, we have a code word when people come in that if we're frightened or concerned, if we say that code name, then we call the police.
You know, we hear Barronelle's story, we see the videos, and we're moved by it, but we forget for her, this is not just a one-time story. This is a day in and day out that affects how she goes to work in the morning, how she comes home. Every phone call she gets impacted by all of this. And imagine this playing out year after year after year since 2013. So what happened with her case was after the Attorney General sued her, made its way to the Washington Supreme Court. Now, one of the arguments we've been making in all of this is that what Barronelle does, what other creative professionals like her do, is speech protected by the First Amendment. Now, a lot of us may say, well, wait a second, speech is this, right? What comes out of our mouth or what's on a written page. But we forget, I think all of us, that speech is so much more than that. Speech can be expression. Speech can be creations. We go to museums to see famous works of art, and they are all undoubtedly speech. And yet what Barronelle does, what Jack Phillips, what all of these others do, is just as much expression, where they express their views about marriage, those of the couples and others, that all comes together. And we've always had a policy in our country that the government should never force anyone to speak a message that they disagree with. And interestingly, at oral argument, the Washington State Attorney General agreed and said, you know what Barronelle does is speech, but nonetheless, she should be forced to create floral arrangements that violate her religious beliefs. Well, the Washington State Supreme Court ruled against Barronelle, and we appealed her case to the U.S. Supreme Court. And around the same time, Jack Phillips' case, the Colorado baker, was also going to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court gets to pick and choose what cases it wants to take. It gets thousands of requests every year and only takes about 80 cases, and they took Jack's case. So we were very excited about that, but also curious of how that was going to impact Barronelle's case, very similar. So as you all know, the court ruled for Jack Phillips, specifically about the hostility that Colorado showed to Jack, just like Barronelle experienced. In Jack's case, it was that the government officials were saying that his beliefs about marriage were the same types of beliefs that had justified and motivated the Holocaust, comparing religious, thousands of years old beliefs about marriage to the Holocaust. And the Supreme Court called that out and said that type of government hostility is impermissible and has no place in our constitutional framework, and ruled for Jack. So we thought, well, are they going to do the same thing for Barronelle? And so what the court did is they sent Barronelle's case back to the Washington State Supreme Court and said, reconsider her case in light of our ruling for Jack. Now, normally when the Supreme Court does that, it's a very clear message, hey, court, fix this. Did the Washington State Supreme Court do it? No. They copied and pasted almost entirely their original ruling against Barronelle, slapped it on paper and said, you lose again, Barronelle. So we are now at the Supreme Court again. And we have been waiting over a year now while the Supreme Court has been deciding whether to take her case. We don't know what's going to happen. We think there's another case called Fulton versus City of Philadelphia that involves a religious adoption agency that wants to only place children in a home with a married mother and father. And the City of Philadelphia is discriminating against them. And so we think maybe the Supreme Court may be ruling for the adoption provider there, protecting their right to be free from religious discrimination, and then take up Barronelle's case. Or maybe they'll send it back to the Washington to the Supreme Court again. We hope not, because I think we know the outcome. But I ask you to join us in prayer. We could have some action, some decision on Barronelle's case, honestly, anytime within the next few months. And so please keep that as a matter of prayer as her case is moving forward. Again, she's been waiting 7 years for all of this. But let me ask about that. Back at the Supreme Court twice, was that ever anything you imagined you would be doing?
That was never on my bucket list.
So, how do you feel now that it's waiting at the Supreme Court? What are your thoughts and feelings about what you hope to see in all of this?
Well, I'm excited because that means God's not done with us yet. But I also hope that the Supreme Court will realize how important this is, whether you're religious or not. If I lose my freedom, you lose yours. It's just that simple.
I know we've talked about this before, and I'm always, want to be cautious going this, but what if the case doesn't go like we want? What do you risk to lose in all of this, Barronelle?
If we lose our case, we'll most likely lose everything that we've worked for our kids and our grandkids. We'll lose our business, our retirement, our life savings. The employees will lose their job. Our vendors will lose us as customers. The state will lose our taxes. It's a trickle-down effect. Freedom isn't free, so there is a cost.
I have to ask, we've been in this for years, and I'm constantly in awe of the grace and the determination and the hope and joy that you've kept in the midst of all this. Even as us attorneys, we've had the ups and downs, and sometimes like, God, God, why are you letting this happen? And one of the things I've just seen with you in all of this is just a steadiness. How do you handle all of this? What is it that keeps you joyful and hopeful in the midst of this long, drawn-out walk?
Well, my faith, of course, and my husband, Daryl, he is my rock. He keeps me in line when I get off track. And people like you that encourage us, that send me cards and letters and phone calls and pray for us. But I want my kids and my grandkids and my great-grandkids to know that there's a line that sometimes we have to stand up for. And I want to be an example for them, that they know it's worth it.
So one last question for you, Barronelle. We've got a room full of people, many of whom have been following your case. So had so many of you come up and tell Barronelle how you've been praying for her constantly. And there are people, as we're going to talk about, that the very law that you've been suffering under for these years, that they're now seeing pop up in their state. And just maybe some closing words. What encouragement would you offer to them tonight?
Well, I hope none of you ever have to go through this. I hope that you never have to see where the government can tell you what to do, what to say, what to create. And if you don't, they'll totally destroy you. They're using me for an example, and many times it works because people are afraid. And I'll tell you, when God puts on your heart to do something, all he asks of you is to be obedient. And if you're willing and he gives you something to do, he will give you the tools and the strength to do it. And when my kids and grandkids and great-grandkids come to me and say, Grandma, what happened to our faith? What happened to our freedom? Or worse yet, when I'm kneeling before Christ and he says, Barronelle, what have you done to uphold my name? I don't want my answer to be, I did nothing.
Join me one more time in thanking Barronelle at the EC.
Inspired? There's a couple things that really speak to me. One of those is that Barronelle wasn't looking to take a stand. And when it came to her, she knew where that line was. And she was willing to stand, to take a bold, brave move. Now, Washington State is a long ways from North Carolina. And Jack is in Colorado, I think, right? And so still a long ways from here. Unfortunately, there's not enough distance. The same issue that she faced are being fought here. And so I'd like to call up Tami Fitzgerald to talk to us about what's happening in North Carolina and the SOGI laws.
Well, it's kind of hard to go after Barronelle because she has such a compelling story. And it's not just a story, it's her life. And it's very exciting to see her sharing what she's had happen in her life with the rest of you, so that it gives you a glimpse of how you might take what she's done and do it in your life. Now, tonight I want to talk to you about some issues that we have in North Carolina, because North Carolina Values Coalition is here in the state on the ground, and we are dealing with these issues, the same ones that Barronelle has encountered. And I just want to give you some information. So we're going to start by learning a few things, then we're going to prepare you, and finally we're going to learn how to defend our faith. So if you see this picture on the screen, how many of you feel like that sometimes? Like the culture's just blowing you sideways. I loved this picture when I found it, and it reminds me of what we are going through right now as a culture. And in North Carolina especially, we are in the crosswinds of some cultural shifts that are coming that I think are going to find us all flat-footed if we're not prepared. This reminds me that in 2015, the U.S. Supreme Court decided the same-sex marriage case, as Barronelle talked about. And in that case, of course, for the first time ever, they decided same-sex couples could get married. That case is what basically repealed the marriage amendment that Pastor Harris and I worked so hard to get passed in the state. Many of you worked on that, and thank you for your help. And the Supreme Court repealed it just 2 years later with a Supreme Court decision, which is such a shame. But in the dissenting opinion, Justice Samuel Alito said something that was almost prophetic at that point in time. He said, "I assume that those who cling to old beliefs will be able to whisper their thoughts in the recesses of their homes. But if they repeat those views in public, they will risk being labeled as bigots and treated as such by governments, employers, and schools." Isn't that what's happening right now? We're being called bigots, homophobes, transphobes, and all sorts of names just because we believe in God's word, because we're standing up for biblical values. And of course, what's happening now is that forces in our country want to call religious freedom the ability to practice your religion or express your beliefs inside the four walls of your church or inside the four walls of your home only. And so what they are trying to do is take away a fundamental right of our American culture, which is to exercise our religious beliefs wherever we are, in public, in private, at home, at church, at work, wherever we are. And so don't ever forget that religious freedom doesn't just apply to church. It applies to you in your life wherever you go. I want to talk to you just a little bit about what's at stake. And in North Carolina, what we see at stake is exactly what has been at stake in places like Washington State. It's the freedom to operate your business according to your religious beliefs and the right of artistic professionals to express themselves without government coercion, to express views with which the government might disagree. And also, the church is under these same sorts of attacks. So it's directed not only at your business, but also at the church. So what are the threats here in North Carolina? Well, the new orthodoxy that we hear coming from the left so many times is that religious freedom is a license to discriminate. In other words, they're blaming religion, specifically Christianity, as the reason they can't have unfettered access to the sexual freedom they want. So LGBT groups are no longer wanting equality. They want to rule by punishing those who dissent. And we're no longer in a state of plurality where you can coexist, like the bumper sticker says. We're entering an era of punishment for Christians and for Christian ministries. Now, Matt talked to you a little bit about SOGI laws and what SOGI laws are, the sexual orientation and gender identity. That's what SOGI stands for. And those laws are really the antidote to this for the LGBT crowd. They want to pass these SOGI laws so they can create uniformity of thought and speech on beliefs about marriage, sex, and what it means to be male and female. They want to empower government to punish people who willingly serve everyone, like Barronelle, but decline to promote messages or celebrate events that conflict with their religious beliefs. They also take away free speech and religious freedom for a vast number of Americans, and most of the time they have no religious exemptions. They're trying to forget that we have a First Amendment. But the freedom to live peaceably according to our beliefs is a fundamental right, resting in our human dignity and codified by the First Amendment. It shouldn't just be traded away. Now, in North Carolina, we have threats at the federal, the state, and the local level from SOGI laws. Under the federal threat, we have executive orders issued by President Biden, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. We also have the Equality Act, And then at the state level, we've had bills filed in the General Assembly, SOGI bills. And then at the local level, we now have SOGI laws called ordinances that are passing in local county governments and cities across our state. Eventually, this will all end up in the courts because the court is going to have to decide which rights prevail, which is greater, religious freedom or the right of LGBT groups to force everyone to share their beliefs about marriage and sex. Under President Biden, what we have seen is that the Human Rights Campaign is really running the country. And the Human Rights Campaign is the biggest LGBT activist group in the country. And the first thing that President Biden did when he got into office in January was issue an executive order. He issued another one on March the 8th, and these two orders together really reversed what Trump had done on sports and schools. I don't know if you remember during HB2, you remember HB2, don't you? Yes, our legislators would like to forget it and see it in the rearview mirror, but you know, when Charlotte passed a SOGI law in 2016 through their city council, the state legislature came back and repealed it by passing HB2. HB2 was a ban on SOGI laws statewide. It said no local government can pass a SOGI law. So it effectively repealed the Charlotte SOGI law. And when that happened, President Obama, who was in office then, did not like it that North Carolina had repealed this law. So he issued an executive order that basically said that in Title IX was going to be interpreted in accordance with SOGI. In other words, you had to have gender identity and sexual orientation elevated under Title IX. And then when Trump came into office, he reversed that, and now Biden has reversed it again. So we've gone zigzag under all these presidents. And this new order that President Biden has issued is even worse than the Obama executive order. But the effect of it is that boys can now compete on girls' sports teams, and they have access to girls' locker rooms and bathrooms under a presidential executive order of all things. We also have laws at the federal level. We have new standards for employers with 15 or plus employees. We had a Supreme Court decision issued last summer called Bostock. It's a Bostock case in which the Supreme Court said that in employment issues, you have to elevate sexual orientation and gender identity. And that applies to all companies with 15 plus employers. The executive order also impacts places of public accommodations, healthcare, and housing. And so, again, under this order, we have no religious exemptions. We also have another threat at the federal level called the Equality Act. It's H.R. 5. I don't know how much you've read on this, but it is a SOGI law on steroids. And like all SOGI laws, it would amend the Civil Rights Act of 1964 to include two additional protected classes, sexual orientation and gender identity. And instead of resulting in equality, like the name says, it really results in greater inequality. So it should be named the Inequality Act because it hurts women and people of faith the most. It also limits the free exercise of religion, and just the fundamental concepts of what it means to be female and male are reversed under the Equality Act. It uses the full weight of the federal government to enforce this by punishing people who disagree with the government's view on sexuality. Again, there are no exemptions for religion. The Equality Act has passed the Congress, it's passed the House of Representatives, but it has not been taken up yet by the U.S. Senate. And so we have a call to action on our website at ncvalues.org/Equality Act, where you can sign a letter that will be sent to our two senators, Senator Tillis and Senator Burr, to ask them to vote no on the Equality Act. I will tell you that I've had some correspondence with both of their offices, and I've gotten assurance from Senator Tillis's office that he will not vote for it. but I've gotten no such assurance from Senator Burr. And so I would urge you to take action and contact them through ncvalues.org/Equality Act. At the state level, we have a SOGI threat that you may not be aware of. In 2019, the North Carolina High School Athletic Association passed a new rule that allows student athletes to participate on the basis of gender identity. So if you are a boy identifying as a girl, you can compete on any girls' sports team. All you have to do is fill out a form, send it into your school. They get this committee on the North Carolina High School Athletic Association board to approve your form, and then you can compete. There aren't any other requirements. It really is just based on self-declaration alone. I don't know, how many of you men in the room were 14-year-old boys? I mean, it just begs the question, what would you do if you were a 13, 14, 15-year-old boy? You know, would you want to be on the girls' track team? Well, sure. Not only can you win, but you can go into their locker room. This, unfortunately, was passed by a group that really doesn't have any accountability to taxpayers, to parents, to the school system, to the General Assembly, because the North Carolina High School Athletic Association is a nonprofit. And so when I sent them a public records request, they just laughed at me and said, we don't have to answer. We're not a public organization. If you want to take action on that problem that we have with NCHSAA, you can go to our website at /sports and sign a petition that goes to all of your legislators. We actually have a bill that we have filed, we've helped legislators file, I should say, in the General Assembly this year called Save Women's Sports. And this is House Bill 358. Now, if this bill passes, it will outlaw boys playing on girls' sports teams, not only in high school, but also for college athletics. So that's the NCHSAA and girls' sports. What we're seeing now, the last threat, is on the local level. And this map I lifted right off the website of Equality NC. These are their targets. If you can see those little green dots, those are the cities they're targeting, and the blue dots are the cities where they've already passed SOGI laws. This just started in January, to our horror, because the last little bit of HB 2 expired in December. And so you can see that all over the state, they either have targets or they have already passed SOGI laws. And Equality NC is the big LGBT advocacy group in North Carolina. These local SOGIs have quite an impact, just about as much as a statewide SOGI would, except they're just isolated to a geographical region like a city or a county. But they add these protected classes of sexual orientation and gender identity to the non-discrimination laws. They apply to any place that distributes goods or services. It's not any place that sells goods or services, it's any place that distributes goods or services, which means it's very broad. It could even apply to Samaritan's Purse handing out water after a hurricane. They apply to anyone who employs one or more persons. So it's not limited to a business or some place of commerce. It could be you employing someone to cut your grass once a week. Again, there are no religious exceptions, so they apply to churches, Christian schools, and Christian organizations in most of the ones that have passed. So they mandate compliance by either charging you a fine of $500 a day or with an equitable remedy that forces compliance. You can see on this slide that the SOGI laws have already passed in Carborough, Chapel Hill, Durham, Greensboro, Hillsborough, Orange County, and Boone. Wasn't it Jesse Helms that said we should put a fence around Chapel Hill? I think now we need to expand it and put it around all of Orange County. But those were the first 4 places to pass these SOGI laws. And we've had other cities around the state who have passed policies. of SOGI policies that just apply to their city employees. And that's usually the first thing they do before they come back and then pass an ordinance. There really is very little you can do to prepare for a lawsuit if you own a business and you want to run your business according to your religious beliefs. There just aren't as many protections as there are for Christian ministries. But we do still have the First Amendment, praise God, and we do still have our religious phrase in our state constitution. And so this definitely would be used as defenses, as well as the Religious Freedom Restoration Act at the federal level. But you will be challenged. If you are a business owner, you'll be challenged on whether you have to provide your creative services for events that disagree with your religious beliefs. You'll be challenged on bathrooms and on employment decisions. And so I want you to think through, what are you going to do when the challenge comes to you? Like Barronelle, it wasn't a challenge that she went looking for. It came to her. The fight came to her. The most important preparation, I believe, that you can do is pray. I think you can ask God to protect you, to protect your business, your church, your ministry, all the ministries that you donate to. So I want you to really realize that prayer is the most important thing that we can do about not being attacked. Second of all, you should role play. What will you do when you're confronted? What will you say? What did Barronelle say? She put her hands on Rob's hands and she said, I cannot do your wedding because of my relationship with Jesus Christ. These are words you can practice. You can role play. And you should fall asleep at night praying for God to give you wisdom about what will you say, because you want to be prepared to have an answer full of gentleness and respect. Because people who suffer from LGBT issues are just like the rest of us. And we want them to come to Christ through the sweetness of his love for us. And they only see that through us. So we should have a gentle answer. Now, a couple of things that I wanted to do. First of all, I want to give credit to Alliance Defending Freedom for a lot of the information that is contained previously that you didn't see about how to protect your ministry. And we'll be sending that out. So if you are involved in a ministry, say you're a board member of a pregnancy care center or a Christian school, you can take that information to the head of school or the board chair and make sure that you've protected the ministry with some legal actions. But the next thing I wanted you to know is that on these local SOGI laws, we do have a page set up on our website where you can take action specifically by emailing your city council or your county commission. So you can go to this page. We have over 40 cities listed there that are targets for these SOGI laws, and you can click on your city and send the letter immediately with one click to all of your city council members and county commission members. And it's proactive. It's a way for you to tell them what your wishes are in advance. I did want to close tonight with a verse that I think is very applicable to what we're going through right now. You know, in the early church, Peter and John were called before the Sanhedrin, and they were put through this inquisition. And at the end of it, Peter said to them, we must obey God rather than men. And isn't that where we are today? So many people have more fear of other men than they do of God. And we need to be reminded of that daily, that we should fear God above all else. And then at the end of the chapter, it says, the apostles left the Sanhedrin rejoicing because they had been counted worthy of suffering disgrace for the name. And I encourage you to leave here tonight. I hope that you will be joyful when you suffer disgrace for the name of Jesus Christ. Thank you.
Well, would you just give these folks a hand one more time for just giving us their evening and coming to share? And let's stand to your feet, if you will, as we close in prayer tonight. And, you know, I hope you have been challenged, and I hope indeed that you have have heard what's happening and that you will let God take the seeds He's planted in your heart tonight and leave from here ready to be His instrument that can be used, because you can make a difference. Look around you tonight. I mean, a group this size on a Monday evening in Mooresville, North Carolina, gathering together, if we are all informed and we're all equipped with the truth and we're all alerted to what's happening and we're all simply mobilized to move out and make the difference, folks will respond. We elect elected officials to represent the people. When we see things not going the way they need to go, we as the people have to step in and speak up and speak out, and we must be heard. So it's so important for you not to miss the opportunities that you've heard here tonight.
I'd like to introduce Barronelle and Matt to you at this time and thank them for being on the tour with us. Thank you so much for the week that we've had.
Thank you.
It's been a wonderful opportunity to get to know you, Barronelle, in a personal way, and you too, Matt. And we just want to thank you for being on the tour with us. And I'd like to ask you just one question to wrap it all up. What did you learn? What was the highlight of the week for you this week?
I think the highlight for me was the people we met and the places we have been, and of course your famous barbecue.
Wonderful. Well, we do have some famous barbecue.
Yes, you do.
Yes, but it varies from one side of the state to the other. And how about you, Matt? What do you think wraps it all up for this week?
I think it's encouraging to see the people coming out that are really interested in hearing Barronelle's story and being willing to help share it across the state, because there's no more powerful way to explain the harm of SOGI laws than to tell stories like those of Barronelle and to show the victims of these laws in other states like Washington State and why we need to stand against them here in North Carolina.
Great. Well, we thank you for your expertise on the issue and how you shared it with our viewers and the people around the state. And Barronelle, just one last question. What would you like to leave with the people of North Carolina as you go home?
Many of you say that you're behind us 100%, and we really appreciate that, but we don't need you behind us. We need you beside us. If we do not stand up now, very, very soon we will have nothing to stand up for.
That's great. What a great thought-provoking statement. And I just thank you for your time here this week. I know it's been very demanding, and we appreciate the energy that you put into it. And you too, Matt. Thank you both.
Thank you.
And so I hope you enjoyed this episode of The Voice, and join us again next time. Thank you and good night.
So, how in the world did we reach a place in our society where we're passing laws that allow men in the women's restrooms? Well, much of this can be traced back to political activists and lobbyists who are spending millions of dollars to pass SOGIs at all three levels of our government: federal, state, and the local or city level. Now, they've repeatedly failed to convince Congress to pass a SOGI at the federal level, and less than half of states have passed a SOGI at the statewide level. So the primary push right now is really to pass these laws at the local or city level. So here's how it generally works. An activist will approach a sympathetic city council member who then proposes the bill to his colleagues as a fix to a problem that, well, no one actually knew existed. But because the bill is clouded with words like discrimination, intolerance, and, well, the city council members, of course, don't want to appear uncaring, they oftentimes will quickly pass the bill into law without fully knowing its ramifications. So consequently, the community may not even be aware that a SOGI is being considered until it's already passed and on the books. Well, when SOGIs are passed into law, we insert them into what we call non-discrimination laws. And that sounds like a good and reasonable thing, right? But in actual practice, SOGIs are very problematic. For example, One challenge right off the bat is that even though we think we know what we're talking about when we use terms like sexual orientation and gender identity, these terms are actually pretty vague. They're not very well defined. I logged onto Facebook the other day and realized that Facebook now offers over 60 different gender options. No longer do you just select male or female, but you can choose from a wide variety of custom genders as well. Gender fluid, gender nonconforming, gender questioning, gender variant, gender queer, bigender, cisgender. And with regard to sexual orientation, even the experts disagree about what exactly it is. Some experts say sexual orientation is sexual attraction to men, women, both sexes, or neither sex. Other experts disagree and say, well, no. It's actually personal identity based on your sexual attractions. Still other experts say, well, it's really more behavioral in nature, based on your mannerisms or based on your sexual conduct. And then other experts say, look, guys, it's really all of the above. But the bottom line is that sexual orientation just isn't an obvious or easily identifiable category like race. So ironically, we're actually forced to resort to stereotyping people. Not only do SOGIs deal with vague and amorphous and difficult to define categories, but they also have very far-reaching effects. And if I may say so, they oftentimes will even reach absurd practical results. So consider these questions. Can a public school tell a teenage boy who psychologically identifies as a girl and dresses like a girl that he can't play on the girls' softball team? Or can a gay bar owner prefer to hire gay bartenders so that he can attract the type of clientele he's seeking? Or what about the corporate business office? Is it allowed to maintain a reasonable dress code and say, men, pantsuits only, while allowing women to wear those skirt suit combinations? Under a SOGI, the answer to all of these questions is no. SOGIs have inserted into the law more confusion than clarity. But let's dig out of the weeds for just a minute. Have we actually even demonstrated that there's a need for SOGIs? My home city of Phoenix passed a SOGI just a couple years ago. And in the 2 years that this law has been on the books, only 4 complaints, 4 allegations of discrimination have been filed, all of which, by the way, were dismissed as baseless. If sexual orientation and gender identity discrimination were truly a widespread and pervasive issue, and people were being fired from their jobs or denied access to public services based on these categories, I would expect to see hundreds of complaints filed in a city the size of Phoenix. And you know, I think that's one thing that made me so upset about finding that guy in the women's restroom. We have no actual evidence that SOGIs are even needed. But we do have actual evidence that they open the door to all sorts of harm. SOGIs make it far too easy for men with evil intentions to exploit these laws. I have no idea whether the guy walking into the women's facility genuinely and sincerely identifies as the opposite sex, or whether he's there to harm me. A man in Washington State used a SOGI to gain access to the women's swimming pool locker room, where he then repeatedly exposed himself to girls as young as 6 years old. And local officials said, "Nothing we can do about it, guys. He's got the legal right to be there. Girls, if you're uncomfortable, find a different locker room." And in Toronto, a dangerous sexual predator used a SOGI to gain access to women's shelters, where he then raped 2 different women. As a woman, I feel vulnerable and unsafe, knowing that my government places so little value on my personal privacy and safety. SOGIs confuse, They don't clarify. SOGIs create problems. They don't solve them. And as a society, we can still show concern for an individual who's struggling with feeling accepted or wrestling with an internal conflict over their gender without passing bad laws. SOGIs are distorting, they're unhelpful, and they're outright dangerous. SOGIs are bad for our communities, and there are much better ways to promote human flourishing and to protect the freedoms of every member of our society. Thank you.